Hi, my name is Gene Arnold, and during this video, I'll be giving you an overview of authentication and how this works with Jaspersoft. In order to understand how authentication works from within Jaspersoft, it's really important to understand authentication in general. First, let's discuss directory lookup. Provides a central place to store usernames and passwords. This allows many different applications and services to connect to a directory server to validate your users. Really, you can think of a directory lookup as the yellow pages. There's one location within your organization that has information about your users, their username, their passwords, their roles, maybe any attributes, email addresses, things like that that you want to store about your users, and it's all stored in one location. This way you don't have to worry about information varying between different locations. Everything is saved in one location, the directory lookup. Another item we should discuss is single sign-on. Allows access to multiple applications using the same login. Can be combined with a directory. Single sign-on, with this approach, users log into one authority, and after they've logged into this authority, applications are bound to this authority, and when a user tries to log into one of those specific applications, that application will check with the authority and see if the user already has a current session that's valid, and if they do, they may be allowed to log into that specific application based on whatever the rules are set within your specific authority. Using single sign-on, users can log in one location and be granted access to different applications. Jaspersoft can be configured easily to connect to either one of the previously discussed authentication services, but it also can stand on its own. Within Jaspersoft, you can store usernames, passwords, and roles about your specific users. So users can simply log into Jaspersoft, and Jaspersoft does not need to be connected to an external authentication system. If you do choose to connect Jaspersoft to an external authentication system, it simply just makes embedding Jaspersoft within your organization even more streamlined. In fact, you can even pass from your application into Jaspersoft via HTTP, username and passwords. All this will be discussed in more detail in following videos. Let's talk about external database authentication. This type of authentication falls underneath the directory category. In this process, a user attempts to log into Jaspersoft, passing username and credentials that should be stored inside of an external database. Via JDBC, the username and password will be passed over to this external authentication database. This can be a number of different relational databases. Now, when that username and password is passed to the external database, it'll be verified and checked there, and we'll see if this username exists inside of the authenticating database, this external authentication database, and we'll also make sure that the password matches up. If all this works well, the user information will be passed from the external database to the Jaspersoft repository database. There, a synced user will be created, and that user will now have access to Jaspersoft, and all of their roles and information that's stored inside of the external database will now be synced into Jaspersoft, and the user will be granted into the Jaspersoft repository database, and they'll now have access to various things within inside of Jaspersoft. Another very common directory lookup-based authentication would be called LDAP authentication. In this situation, again, a username and password is entered into Jaspersoft. And via LDAP, the information is sent to the LDAP server. At that point, we'll be checking to see if the username and the password exists inside of the LDAP server. If everything checks out within the LDAP server, the user will be synced into the Jaspersoft repository database. And just like with the external database authentication process, this user will be created inside of the Jaspersoft repository database, and the user will be granted access into Jaspersoft. They'll then be able to use Jaspersoft and be granted the various things and items like reports inside of the Jaspersoft server. Let's now discuss another form of authentication, one that uses both directory and SSO services. This one would be called CAS authentication. In this example, your user logs into your portal, not Jaspersoft, but your application. When the user logs into your application, they're then sent over to the CAS server. Within the CAS server, a session is created with this logged in user. The user now has a logged in status within the CAS server. Any application that's now bound to the CAS server for authentication can use the information inside the CAS server to either grant or deny access of a user based on their status in the CAS server. So when that user logs into the CAS server, that server will talk to a directory system to see if the user exists within inside of a directory service. Obviously, it can be various types. And again, the user has a current logged in status within the CAS server. Now that user may move over to another application, a mail, calendar, or in this example, a JasperReports server. When the user tries to open up anything that has to do with JasperReports, the JasperReports server is bound to the CAS server and will look towards CAS to see if the user is logged in and has a valid session. If everything checks out, that user, just like before, will be synced into the Jasper repository database, and then the user will be granted access to the JasperReports server. Let's talk about token-based authentication now. This is a form of single sign-on authentication. In this example, a user will log into your application. Once they're logged into your application, Jaspersoft will be set up to communicate to your application, and when a user tries to open up or access anything to do with Jaspersoft, a token that has all the user information will be sent from your application into the JasperReports server, and then that user will be synced into the Jaspersoft repository database. Once this happens, the user will now have access to information within inside of the JasperReports server. The information can be encrypted between the two systems, and we certainly can also offer various methods of passing information back and forth within inside of this token-based authentication. This is just one simple process and example of using token-based authentication between your application and JasperReports server. Now, when it comes to authentication, the list does go on and on. There are various other methods of authenticating between an application and JasperReports server. You may have a custom authentication method that's required. You may be using OAuth, which is another very popular method of authenticating. Just to understand, Jaspersoft is built on top of the Spring framework. Jaspersoft will be using the Spring authentication model when it comes to authenticating with outside applications, and you can utilize the tools within Spring to connect Jaspersoft to various systems. So just understand that if Spring can do it, there's a pretty darn good chance that Jaspersoft can handle it for you as well. So again, this is Gene Arnold from Jaspersoft, and I really want to thank you for your time. Remember that we'll be following up this video with a number of authentication videos showing you more detail around how Jaspersoft can be connected to various systems and how the authentication process can be extended and Jaspersoft can be embedded tightly within your own products. Certainly hope this video was helpful, and I thank you for your time.